Hi everybody, welcome to our launch this evening, and thank you so much for being here. Of course, we're here to launch Sheri Benning's new collection, Field Requiem. Sheri is here and she's going to read for us shortly. We're also joined by Karen Solie, a poet whose most recent book, The Capely Caves, is out with Pam Macmillan at the moment, so definitely check that out if you don't know her work. My name's Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press. I'm just going to run over what's going to happen this evening before we launch into the poetry reading itself. So we'll be together for about an hour. Obviously we can't see you and you can't turn your cameras on, so please do find the chat box. Make sure that you click everyone so we can all read each other's messages. Let us know where you are, where you're watching, what you think of the readings as we go through this event. And later on, we would like you to get involved in the conversation. So after Sheri has read for us, she's going to chat with Karen about the work. And towards the end of the event, we'd like to have your questions to put to Sheri. So as well as finding the chat box, please can you also find a button that's called Q&A. It'll open a pop-up box, and if you could get your questions for Sheri lined up in there, we can get you involved in the conversation later on, and that will be very cool. So if you've got any other questions about anything that's going on, just drop them in the chat and we'll try and help you throughout this event. While Sheri's reading, I'm going to have the text on screen for you so that you can follow along visually. Just try and play around with your screen if it's not working for you. And again, just drop any questions in the chat and we'll try and help you out there. So I think that's everything. I'm going to invite Karen on screen now to join me and we'll begin this reading.
Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to be a part of the celebration of Sheri Benning's new collection of poems. Sheri grew up on a farm in central Saskatchewan in Canada. In addition to being the author of Field Requiem, she has published a volume of new and selected poems with Carcanet titled The Season's Vagrant Light, as well as the collections Thin Moon Song and Earth After Rain in Canada. Her work has appeared in North American, British, and European journals and anthologies, most recently the Paris Review, the TLS, Poetry Review, Brick, and PN Review. With her sister, visual artist Heather Benning, and filmmaker Chad Galloway, she recently completed a short film, Winter Sleep, which is based on the poem of the same title. Winter Sleep is an official selection at the Nature and Culture Poetry Film Festival in Copenhagen, the Cadence Video Poetry Festival in Seattle, the Montreal Independent Film Festival, and the Vancouver Independent Film Festival. Winter Sleep was also shortlisted for Best Experimental Film at the Yorkton Film Festival. And I didn't even know Yorkton had a film festival, which is fantastic. Winter Sleep is also featured on the Paris Review blog, The Daily, and I encourage everyone to view that film. It's absolutely stunning. I also grew up on a family farm in Saskatchewan, and I know firsthand the urgency of the work of Field Requiem. How, as Sheri has written, rural people are among those on the front lines of rapidly changing relations between humans and their environments. The book bears witness to how corporate culture, economies, climate crisis, and injustice are mutually informing, if not inseparable. Sheri has written that the poems of Field Requiem hope to reveal our dynamic bonds with place, to show how our relationships to homes shape us. Sheri and I have had a number of conversations regarding the emotional and practical bind many farmers find themselves in as they attempt to square the necessity of making a living with the stranglehold corporations have on food production and on producers, and with the history and legacy of this system of production. Sheri writes that the poems also want to confess, to announce culpability in ecological collapse and the vast colonial violence that precipitates the agro-industry. Field Requiem is a work of witness, of resistance, of warning. And it's also a work of deep mourning for the land, its people, the personal loss of her own family's farm. Interestingly, the poems emerge from the deep solitude of mourning into collaboration and interdisciplinary practice with the work of her sister, Heather Benning. And the idea of cross-disciplinary approaches, the collaboration in the face of crisis, contains its own seed of hope, I think. I'm so happy to be part of celebrating the publication of this important and beautiful book and to introduce to you Sheri Benning.
Thank you very much for that, Karen. That was really meaningful to me. I also want to thank Jasmine for setting us up today and for just her infinite help throughout this whole process. John McAuliffe and Michael Schmidt, with whom it was a joy to work with on this book. My sister, who I'm really grateful to share this long collaboration with. And my parents, who I've been in whose life's labor was crucial as I composed these poems. Their conversation was crucial to me, and so I'll start with a poem for my dad. Minor doxology. Circle of light on the village street from his kitchen window, where he stands in the slowing breath of nightfall, stares through that cold fire into sifting shadow, dusk blue snow banked against the porch. And beyond the row of houses, evergreens in daguerreotype, darkening on winter fields. The galvanized taste of chores rises in his mouth, well water, dander, frost and straw. And because place calls to place inside us, he is 70 in the kitchen, even as he is 12 in the farmyard, midway between house and barn, metal pail of new milk, quarter moon, spilled oats, early stars. The next poem I'm going to read is called Winter Sleep. Wheat threshed, casks of cherries, plums, boiled melon, beef tallow, pig bladders blown and tossed by children, mothers stirring stock, kidneys, hearts pressed with aspic, casings scraped and stuffed, allspice, cloves. Fields bare, packed clay, porcelain sheen, the long winter sleep. In my dream, I wake and the village is empty, coal smoldering, acacia shadows on snow, second suns, sow thistle, the first to go. In my dream, I wake to chaff and dust, a war lost, harvest thrown down, grain scattered on the temple floor. In my dream, I wake hungry, an ocean away in a hut hollowed out of the side of a hill, black sea salt in my mouth, wild onion, sage, hawkweed, prickly rose, plowed dirt worked thin as smoke, poplar scrub felled and bucked into windrows to make way for electric blooms, Monsanto, Roundup, ready canola. What we had wasn't enough. Silk, balsam, communal granaries full. We were told to take what the master had given us and multiply it tenfold. In my dream, I wake in the attic bedroom of a mail order farmhouse, 160 acres seeded in barley and oats, a few brood hens, 5 head of cattle, 3 hitch binder, a trotter, 2 heavy horses. We were told to take what we did not lay down, reap what we did not sow. I wake to 6,000 acres, high clearance sprayers with 140-foot booms, sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, potash, harvest done by drone, yields downloaded into $750,000 air seeders come spring. We were told to those who have, more will be given. Viterra's actuaries betting on futures markets, brokering grain they don't own. We were told those with nothing, even that will be taken away. Just look at those who stayed. In my dream, the men from Grunau found heads down, shoulder to shoulder, tongues nailed to the dining table. Or Alex Soretsky from Tiganort, blood pouring from his wrists, hands cut off by Machnovists requisitioning his cattle. In my dream, we tell these stories to our babies in their cradles. The lesson of the parable: what good is your labor if the fruit doesn't grow and grow and grow? I wake in the hip roof barn, and where we hang the throat cut animal, men dangle. Hailstorm, flood, drought, interest rates, debt loads. Go big or get out. The next poem I'm going to read is a long poem, and it's sort of maybe the centerpiece of the book. My parents chose to exit agriculture in the late 90s because of this shift, this seismic shift towards agribusiness initiatives. But in the late 2000s, they returned to farming. They really missed the life. And I think for my family, in many ways, farming is a vocation as much as anything. And around this time, I started to visit abandoned yard sites, abandoned churches, villages that populate rural Saskatchewan. As farm sizes increase, the rural is depopulated. And so these poems emerge from taking account of that detritus. And and so I'm going to just read this poem through. So Psalm 130. Chemical burn off after frost. Cocklebur, clubroot spores, flickweed, lamb's quarters, Liberty Link patent fees, canola seed treated for flea beetles, long trail for dandelion and thistle. At night, the wives sit, shoulders hunched at kitchen tables. Divine profit margins with calculators and lines of credit from Wells Fargo. If south winds don't blow in waves of diamondback moths, if winter kills the pupa of Bertha army worms, if sun, if rain, if crop insurance premium rates, if 25 bushels an acre to pay input costs. At night, the wives wait. They count their bones as the moon pours out. Northeast 10, 36, 22, west of 2nd. Canola, pulse, cereal, flax, the field northwest of the yard site, past the shelter belt of unshaved evergreens, caraganas and buffalo beans growing through rusted machinery, grain cart and auger, pull-type swather circa 1984. Canola, pulse, cereal, flax, brushed nap of stubble, GPS tracked, factory stamped seed rows, clots of soil, desiccated scabs, claw marks from the heavy harrow spreading last season's trash, straw, chaff. Canola, pulse, cereal, flax, Roundup, anhydrous ammonia, nitrogen gas, granular phosphorus, sulfur, potash, 120 pounds per acre of wheat seed, broadleaf herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, glyphosate-resistant ragweed in low spots and sloughs. Contagion of snow geese, their many-throated scream, a terrible forgetting. This is where the boy felt the animal's wet-eyed stare. Coyote, fox, jackrabbit, badger. This is where he followed tracks, set snares in estrus scent and molt, scat, shed fur. This is where he lay, a deer's wallow of slender wheatgrass, bluegrass, brome and sedge, watched catkins lift in updrafts, soft rattle of aspens, dozed in the heavy breath of bloom, balsam, wolf willow, chokecherries, saskatoons. This is where he came in sorrow after his father made him shoot the horned owl perched in the spruce north of the chicken coop. No proof the owl killed chicks. Now this is where the man, neck in the noose of profit margins and farm credit, runs the roam plow, the bush disc, clears scrub, rakes roots for 40 more acres to seed next spring. The owl's wingspan, at least 5 feet, though it weighed no more than what he could hold in his 10-year-old palms. All feathers and fluff, shadow and light. After dusk, this is where the man watches the piled bush burn, remembers the owl's yellow eyes, hiss and snap of heat, sap, leaves, hank of dew, osteoache, the shrinking moon. It's true what they say. We were warned. Everything will be swept away, everything consumed. Winter killed perch, walleye, pike, white bellies, slack flags, thousands washed ashore at Stony Lake, fertilizer runoff, nitrogen, phosphorus, blue-green algae bloom. It's true, we were warned. Everything swept away, everything consumed. Sky bled dry of midges, locusts, bees, neurons frayed, antiseptic silence of canola fields at dusk, muted grasshopper thrum. Our blood poured out like dust. Swept away, consumed, empty barn swallow nests in rafters and eaves, the western meadowlark's throat, an open grave, neonic-coated soybean, canola, sunflower, wheat, white-crowned sparrows, migration delayed, anorexic, compass lost, a land possessed of nettles and salt. Ferruginous hawk, black-tailed prairie dog, bobolinks, longspurs, pipits, swift fox, whippoorwill, piping plover, whooping crane, sage grouse. We were warned. Fish, fowl, animal, and they who weigh silver, merchants and traders. Northwest 1844-22 west of 2nd. Clothesline droops with the ghost of wet sheets, translucent moth wings. Ghost moth larvae feed on burdock in Mrs. Rashinsky's overgrown garden, quackgrass, chickweed. You used to come here, tried on the left behind dresses of the dead, butterick patterns, tiny purple flowers, Mrs. Rashinsky's sweat-stained milk fetch. Kitchen door off the hinges in thigh-high brome, a rotten tooth. Someone will pull this root, knock down the house and yard for 5 more acres to seed. Talons hooked over the lintel. Mrs. Rashinsky's arthritic fingers curled in earth. Ravens croak. You were warned. Great Plains auctions. With food in our throats, we asked for more. With food in our mouths, we still asked for more. There was meat and bread, but our craving unslaked. Fat gardens, braids of onion, bled heifers and pigs, skinned, scalded, scraped. Sure, we were sad to see our neighbors go. Bid extra on their socket sets, air compressors, leftover 5-gallon pails of hydraulic oil. Sold, the auctioneer's speakers rattled in his truck bed. We told ourselves if they could, they'd do the same. Frost out of the ground, we poured red froth, Vitamax, into our auger boxes of churning seed to stop stinking smut, C. sativas, root rot, soil-borne disease. You will build houses you don't inhabit, plant crops you don't eat. Your reckless prophets, hungry wolves, will leave nothing. Northwest 1836-22 west of 2nd. Gather in the summer fallowed south field, winter stiff furrows, no moon, no snow, overcast, hold hands. Farm subsidies smashed by intercontinental packers, big sky pork farms. Our barns now their finishing pens for 10,000 pigs from 1,000 sows. No moon, no snow, no yard lights for miles, like an eye put out. Hold hands. We are but breath, but chaff, what passes and does not come again. Old St. Benedict Church, rural municipality of Hoodoo. Where beeswax, chrism, myrrh, where teething babies on mother laps pulled and sucked fistfuls of faux pearl, where we held out our tongues for bread, where dust circled and stained light, where cradles, where coffins, where holy water rained. Black mold climbs the walls, trapped breath of petitions. A choir of shorthorn grasshoppers, a choir of katydids, a choir of wind. The cantor sings, let me begin again. This was our new heaven. This was our new earth, where our former homes were forgotten. Outside, a taxic mule deer stutter between mossed and dated stones. Our bones in the loam womb, the dirt of our new Jerusalem. The parish of St. Scholastica erected this monument in memory of those buried here, 1976. St. Scholastica's fall supper, 6 feet deep in the earth, sod ceiling drips pesticide leach, bones laced with malathion, 2,4-D, turnip smell of canola and stinkweed, wild oats and kosher roots tangled in hair. Don't mention the cutworms that chew dresses and best denims. Parishioners, we paid our fees to feast, tossed 30 pieces on the temple floor, the Dominion Lands Act, 1872, proved up on our field of blood, 160 acres of oxbow sandy loam. Cheekbones and mandibles gleam. Mothers give toddlers drumsticks to gnaw, cartilage and marrow. Don't mention the bread was salted with tears. Don't mention the bowlfuls and bowlfuls of tears. Parishioners, push back your chairs, bring out the accordion, waltz and polka, turn and turn, your bones knit rich dirt. Sated babies snooze on half moons of mother shoulders. Don't mention the tremble, the 700 horsepower John Deere overhead, the tank tread, the stretching bellows, the thickening drone. My ghost waits for me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheri. That was wonderful. Your work has always attended closely to place. And even when you roam among places, the landscapes and the work and the communities of Saskatchewan seem to supply a kind of gravity around which those travels take place. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, because this book, it intensifies and advances some of the aspects of your earlier work, and the sense of mourning in it has become especially urgent and very deep, sending its roots into the past and its warnings into the future. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the context of the book, the changes that you've seen even in your lifetime in Saskatchewan, and a little bit about where you went for this history that provides so much depth in this work.
Yeah, I think I think there is greater urgency, and I think there is greater grief. And I think this is reflective of sort of this tremendous seismic shift that's going on, and that went on during my lifetime in Saskatchewan, farm to city. I think 8% farm 38% of the land. And even just in 50 years, there's something like 50,000 fewer farms now than there used to be. But we're still making the same or more, amount of food. And so there's this concentration. And I do think that as farm size gets bigger, landscaping, community health suffer. And Wendell Berry has this kind of rule of thumb, like the eyes to acre ratio, he calls it. How much land can a farmer farm well when taking into account the genius of the place, so that farming well, meant land health, right? Not just economic health. And that's blown out here, right? Like in many ways, that's been blown. And it is harder. It's harder for smaller farms and mid-sized operators to stay in the game too, I think, as a result of this. So there is this pressure, and so what do we have? We have a landscape right now made increasingly vulnerable by agricultural pressures, that's increasingly sort of ecologically devastated, even as we have a growing populace of contract workers who are angry in a diffuse and maybe inarticulate way. And to me, this strikes me as combustible. So, and very urgent. I think I'm really preoccupied with place and writing on place because of that deep engagement that I had growing up on a diversified farm. You had this, Karen, so you understand too. And I'm interested in the work of philosophers of place who talk about how Tim Lilburn talks about this, Edward Casey, Yi Fu Tuan, about how our maximal selves, who we are, comes into fullness in our relationship to our places. And so if we're losing them to unfettered corporate interests or unfettered capitalism and galloping ecological catastrophe, well, there's going to be grief, right? And so requiem, right? Yeah. Does that answer your question, Karen? I kind of feel like
absolutely. And I mean, the history of the place plays such an important role in it. And you spoke about going around to farmyards, to abandoned yards, abandoned communities, and I know they are all over Saskatchewan. And even, some of the roads on the grid road system are falling into disrepair because no one uses them. It's a very eerie place in a lot of these places. What I'm, being a sort of research-oriented poet myself, I'm wondering how you approach that research. You were there, boots on the ground. Where else did you go for some of the stories in the book?
Family, I mean, predominantly. And so at the top of the reading, I thanked my parents, and in many ways, I feel like they should have like a writing credit here or something like that. Like, mid poem phoning my parents, what is the name of that stuff that you used to put into the auger box, that stuff that was really red, right? So I mean, like incredible time-saving research tool at my fingertips there. It was Larry and Rosalie Benning. So there was that kind of research. Also, I was interested in settlements, and so using sort of my family as the vehicle for that, I did research on Black Sea Germans and their movements from what was Southern Russia, now the Ukraine, to the area where we farm. They were solicited to farm in this area by the members of St. Peter's Abbey that were trying to sort of turn this place into, an agriculture-oriented setting. And so through that vehicle, I sort of researched the settlement of that area. And all the regular places, right? Like archives and Does that make,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love that that going back to the stories of family and place and how intertwined one's relationship is with a place through the stories of the place. And I know what it's like to go to one's parents for that's what is that stuff?
Name of that tractor, Dad. So yeah. The full, should we give up the secret, Karen, that you and I front as farm girls, but we, compared to actual farmers, we know nothing. So I feel like we should disclose that. So yeah.
Well, it's all, those stories have so much, that they are indicative of how much language conditions our relationship to a place. And we've talked about some of the thinkers and writers who've been influences on your work, and Tim Wilburn is a primary influence on your work and on your thinking. And there are a number of things that I feel like you and Tim have in common. One of them being your interest in a philosophy of attention, and in how you use the incantatory and the cumulative effects of image and language to enact this attention. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between place and language in your thinking, and particularly in Field Requiem?
Yeah, I mean, I'm such a deep reader of Wilburn's and have been in conversation with him, for decades. And actually, it's conversation with him that is the seed of this manuscript. It's really attributable to those early conversations with Tim on place, on writing place. And I'm also really compelled by Jan Zwicky's thinking on Gestalt thinking, and so how we perceive the world in terms of like resonant wholes, like in wholenesses, and this is how the poem does tend to present itself to me. An image sort of presents itself, and then I'm set with the task of using this clunky and inadequate tool, language, to try to sort of speak the image or name the image and write it down. And then if it works, or if it's, if it approaches something that feels like it's working, it seems to me that it does hang in a kind of resonant relation with the place then, right? Like it's, so those two thinkers have really helped me understand my practice, or kind of understand what I'm doing, and sharpened it, I think. So yeah.
There's, this is so much of the power of a poem is lives in what it suggests rather than what it literally says, that how it kind of expands into the space around it, how it lingers with you after it's gone. And the experience of a landscape in which so much is gone, but it's still there. I mean, so much has disappeared in our lifetime, so we remember it. So every time, we go into one of these landscapes, all of that which is no longer there is still, in a sense, there.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, I did, like, last winter, I spent a lot of time out at St. Peter's Abbey in Munster, Saskatchewan, working on these poems. And my parents are retired from farming now, and they live in Munster. And I was just really struck by the fields. And I think, I can't remember which one of my parents said it, but just that everything's just scraped away. Like it's like these. It is as though like sort of surgical drapes, because there was snow, and so this was the bush where my dad hunted rabbits when he was a kid. Well, it's not there anymore, and so there is that. Yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with that sort of deep memory, and how do you account for that grief and loss, and quite frankly, anger? Is the other part of that emotion too, so yeah, I think that's what these poems are kind of trying to do. Like, I don't know.
Well, someone had mentioned in the chat while you were reading, the ability to harness the anger and the rage of the situation, and I'm curious about how you came to the form of the poems, which are I mean, they're very, it's a very structured work. There's a lot of tercets, a lot of couplets, a lot of quatrains, regular stanzas. Its structure is a very important part of the book. How did you come to those formal decisions, and what do you feel how do they speak in the book for you?
I think as a writer, I'm very attentive to sound, and so and part of writing for me often is speaking things out loud, and it's interesting that you say incantatory, because there's lots of repetition involved and lots of, so I am very attentive to sound, and I think I was trying to I don't know if this makes sense, but I think I was trying to sort of construct a kind of harmony that might sort of sculpt that emotion, that sort of rage, grief, emotion, that sort of oscillating, so that they become one, to harness that in the context of a poem. It seemed to me that working within a structured space actually was really helpful in order to kind of yield a sort of harmony, right? And so I was reading a lot of Psalms, and I was reading the Dies Irae and the foundational texts upon which that piece is based, and then just in my downtime, I was listening to different treatments of requiems in a very casual way, like going for a walk, put on Shostakovich's Requiem, go for a walk. So I think that kind of structure probably made its way into the poem. So yeah.
Yeah, that's that's just so interesting, just having the poems replay in my mind, and it brings me to a question about another thing we have in common, which is a Catholic upbringing. And
Right.
someone has asked about that element of the structure in your book, which is very much based in Catholic rites, prayer, song, and ritual. Do you have the sense of this book as expressing almost like a culmination of that influence, that that is so deeply charged with metaphor and with language and with rhythm? Do you feel like that has all come to a kind of turning point with this book?
Yes, I think so. I sense, I mean, so we've talked about this, Karen, like growing up in that setting sort of primes you for metaphor, doesn't it? Like it like the ritual of the mass, but also the Psalms, or like this, I think this parables, right? Like this sort of just primes. So I was, so I think that influence is sort of like my first sort of entry point into kind of understanding metaphor. And I feel it's possible. That I think there is a way in which these poems, look, this summer, like everything kind of came into relief, right? We had a heat dome settle on Western Canada that was terrifying. We had to confront the residential schools and the mass graves that were found. It felt like a crisis point, and so as I was like sort of working on the edits for these poems and copy editing, I was thinking, like I'm trying to now articulate this. Like, so if my work is in relation to place and the place is in crisis, the poems will be in crisis too, I think, or to try to sort of name, take account of and atone for that crisis, if that makes any sense. But yeah.
Was there any comfort to be had in that return to ritual?
Was there any what? Sorry, Karen? Comfort.
Maybe is a better word.
I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, definitely, because it was a meditative space that I could enter, right? And so, and so, yeah, using that framework, the framework of the Requiem, yeah, just gave me that sort of meditative space to try to start naming some of these things. Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to turn to the Q&A box now, and Michael Schmidt asks, the vivid violent vision you paint seems irreversible. Can the anger, the elegy, aid any recovery, any change back or positive change forward?
I don't know. It feels really intractable right now, and I mean, I think Jan Zwicky wrote a wonderful essay called "Learning to Die," and and in that essay she talks about a kind of stance one might affect when confronting these sort of seemingly irreversible and harsh reality of climate change, and also I think companion to that, unfettered corporate interests taking over how we approach land. And so maybe the poems, maybe the Requiem performs the function of helping people live within this moment, and maybe and to take note of beauty. So that's yeah.
It does. It's so much, and it just in the complication of it, in the intersection of all of these things, climate crisis, the absolute dominance of corporate interests in farming, historic injustice, it all feels paralyzing. And that kind of, there is no way forward if there isn't any hope. And that recognition of beauty is perhaps the where it can come from. Corey Wolf asks, land and lifestyle are intertwined. Many years ago, we were discussing the changing dynamics of Saskatchewan, and you joked, who's going to play the accordion after a hand of Kaiser before heading home to feed the cattle if everyone just moves to Calgary?
Just quoting an old email. Hi, Corey.
How would you describe that disappearing social life to future generations who will never experience it?
Yeah. I think what happened here, just to make a record of it, I felt that's what I felt like I was doing when I was actually quite illegally now, as it turns out, like visiting these abandoned yard sites and poking around, and just looking and taking note. At the time I thought this was like a very strange thing to do. I was worried that it was the practice itself was maybe sort of nostalgic or macabre or something, and but people like Tim Lilburn, Michael Schmidt as well, just keep doing this and keep taking note of it, and I think that's what I was doing. I think I was trying to take record of this culture that was here momentarily, and register it. Yeah.
Just the social life aspect is so obvious, the changes out there, where there used to be a lot of community events and a lot of things for young people to do, and a lot of that is gone. Someone kindly in the chat corrected me on the Yorkton Film Festival, speaking of events that are now happening that I should know about. So and I will make a point of supporting the things that are still in Saskatchewan and in smaller centers. So
and there's really great initiatives taking place too, just to sort of circle back to Michael's question earlier, what is the hope of the Requiem? And there are initiatives to engage in sharing lands, there's the treaty sharing initiative. There's people doing great work on this subject, and so we got to take our hope where it comes. You know what I mean? Right now, it's
absolutely. And there are people doing things, and there are young people doing things, and that's a very positive aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Sheri Arshik writes, thank you, Sheri. The anger is genuinely palpable in the pieces you've read out. It sounds like an incipient indignation which is pitching to boil over. Is such an eruption planned for future work? It's a good question. Where do you go from here?
Yeah, I'm kind of wrestling with the idea of how land use and how engagement with the land is tied to a sort of broader politics. And so so I have sort of a kind of sort of nebulous ideas in the works, and starting to read. I think I imagine a kind of companion manuscript to this, because as you pointed out, Karen, there is a voice emergent, I think, here that that is a departure, and that when I finished, for example, writing Let Them Rest, I felt like there's more here. Like it didn't feel entirely complete or resolved. And so yeah. So I don't know, stay tuned. I don't know, but I'm just starting to kind of, we had a conversation about this previously, Karen, about this sort of strange space of immediately finishing the book. And you said something that meant a lot to me, which was just to make the cave that you're dwelling in right now nice. You know what I mean? Like, so do the reading and just sort of chase down the thoughts and see what emerges from that. So yeah. Thanks, Cheryl.
Lucy Hinney asks, this is a wonderful collection and reading, Sheri. Thank you for sharing. I was so touched to see you end the collection with a view toward Glasgow. What inspired that juxtaposition?
Well, I lived in Scotland, in Glasgow, sort of off and on for the better part of a decade. And my husband is from Glasgow, well, from Irvine, just outside of Glasgow. And sometimes I think, yeah, being away from a home place allows you to have this sort of vision of it that would have been impossible had you not had the experience of leaving. And so Glasgow is this other place for me that's really important, because it's from where I can view this place more clearly, I think, sometimes. So yeah.
Yes. And yeah, it's funny, you know, I as you know, I love Scotland as well. And there's something about parts of it, especially the Highlands. It's like, and someone pointed out to me, it's because there are so few trees, and it's like, oh, well, that's
that maybe is it. Our prairie vision is not obstructed by trees. That's funny.
Yeah. My parents visited me in New Brunswick while I was there, and my dad was complaining that he couldn't see anything.
Karen, that's very funny. My parents did the exact same thing when I was in New Brunswick. They were sort of, offended by all the trees being in the way of, so, yeah.
William Bartley asks, not much comfort in the parable of the talents, am I right?
Yeah, that's, no. And so the connection there is like sort of trying to track down, like, where did this go wrong, right? Like, so, like at what point did the disaster, start to foment? And so I wondered if it wasn't there, if it wasn't the sort of eschatology of a Christian vision. And so, yeah, so the parable of talents and winter sleep kind of an operative turn to sort of think through some of those questions. Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
We should I'll ask you one more question from the chat box, and then I'll ask you to read the final few poems. Let's see. Max Mackay James writes, taking note of beauty, can you observe, mark, and name some small resistances?
A friend wrote to me a letter this summer when we were under a dense cloud of smoke, and the sun was orange and there's forest fires. And she told me about the hummingbirds in her garden. And it was a moment where I just thought, yeah, like, just look, like, it's there. And so, yeah, so I've had, yeah, the hummingbirds.
The hummingbirds are, that's a lovely place to leave off. Thank you everyone for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's question. It's wonderful to see so many being asked at a reading. So thank you all very much for that. And Sheri, I'm going to ask you to leave us with a few more poems from the book.
Thank you, Karen. So as I was talking with Karen, one of the things this collection does is use the vehicle of my family story to talk about settlement in the prairies, and this poem is part of a series that looks at the maternal line of the baby, name lost, 1906, spring-born, almond and blackthorn in bloom, meadowsweet, chickweed, petals of milk on her lips, spider silk saliva from mouth to crabapple fists on mother's lap, the train from Kiev to Minsk, after the last harvest in Tiganort. Teething, feverish, pin-pricked cheeks, mother sings knee writer to distract, bouncing, bouncing baby, should you fall in the ditch, ravens will feast, ravens will feast. Bitter pip of sick picked up in Riga's quarantine. Soon they will slip her little body into the Baltic, wrapped in blue dupioni cut from mother's wedding dress. But now she conducts with waving fists, skeins of dawn mist lift from feathergrass and knapweed by the tracks. Mother's soft breath in the cradle of the train car. Bouncing, bouncing baby, should you fall in the sea, should you fall in the sea. Ravens perch in witch's broom of passing oak and silver fir. Viaticum. These things I remember, the light encrusted wheat, speargrass, meadow brome, the pasture's first maize flush, late April. When tears are my meat day and night, metal on metal echo in the farmyard, late afternoon. Oil-stained coveralls. He's fixing tines on the heavy harrow while she sweeps grain bins for truckloads of bulk seed, flax, barley, oats, peas. Sweet smell of last harvest's rotting crop. Sun low, barn cats grappling by the fuel tanks, air cooled by melting snow. When they ask, where is your place? The slough in the field west of our barns, stubble and dirt loosened from frost, furred willows, frog chorus, the coyote's dusk antiphonal, a bell's tongue in bone marrow. These things I remember as I pour out my soul. To Glasgow. Standing on the platform, Manchester, Victoria, waiting for the after-supper train home to Glasgow. Spring sky, bruised fruit, pigeons in eaves, rain-bloated newsprint, overripe peonies that lined the porch at the farm, long sold. A breeze lifts my hair, sweat of my nape. A train, not mine, shoots past. Diesel, smoke from the burn barrel at dusk, the farm again. Dew on blue stem, my body, my breath, my face in the windows of passing cars. I am, there is no going back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheri. It was such a pleasure to hear you read those poems. And thanks to Karen as well for hosting such a brilliant conversation. It's been a fantastic evening and you guys have been so brilliant in the chat. Thanks so much for all your messages and your questions. It's just been such a pleasure, really. So congratulations, Sheri, on the new book. You guys need to go and buy it. If you don't have a copy, please head to the website. I'm going to put the code and the link in the chat for you. Obviously, you paid £2, which we really appreciate. You'll get that £2 off the copy of the book. there are so many messages, and I know you probably won't be able to do that right now. So check your email inbox tomorrow. That's where the link will come. It's an automatic email from Zoom. If you can't find it, get in touch with me and we will get you a copy of the book by any means possible. So once again, just thank you for being here, and I hope you've had a good night. The last thing to say is please join us again next week. We're launching a new Carcanet Classic edition. It is Poems and Satires by Edna St. Vincent Millay. We'll be joined by the editor, Tristram Fane Saunders, and by poet Abigail Parry. They'll both be reading from the book and talking about it. So check the website, please sign up. And to come again, yes. I'm going to leave everything open so that you can get your final messages in the chat, so you can find that link and you can get your copy of the book. But really, that's everything from us. So thanks again to you guys, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you, Jazz, and thank you everyone for coming. I really, really deeply appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jazz, and congratulations, Sheri.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.